Joining me live now is Sky News aviation expert Captain Byron Bailey. Byron, appreciate your time this morning. Look, that's just an extraordinary story. When you first heard that there was a sole survivor, it seems to be an absolute miracle that he was able to walk away with what has been reported as minor injuries. When you look at the pictures and that huge fireball explosion, that's the only thing you can really think of.
Well, this particular passenger apparently was seated in the rear of the aeroplane against the bulkhead. So he is one very, very lucky man, but this is very tragic. And I've been looking at the video, and unfortunately it appears very strongly that it's highly likely a case of pilot error. Now, people are going to get upset for me saying that. How dare he blame the pilot straight off? But if you look at the video, and I must point out, I'm a 30,000-hour former Boeing 777 captain, and I'm still flying private jets, so I'm well aware of takeoffs. I do it all the time. And in this case, something that is very remarkable is the airplane reaches 625 feet, which is 190 metres, and the undercarriage, the gear is still down. Now, when you're taking off, you're running down the runway, the other pilot would call V1, which is the speed at which you must continue the takeoff, and that's generally around, say, 120 knots. And, of course, a knot is just about 1.9 kilometres an hour. And then the next call you get is rotate, which will occur around, just a guess, 150 knots, and the pilot flying just pulls back on the yoke to raise the nose to an angle of 15 degrees. The other will then call positive rate, which means you're climbing, and the vertical speed indicator indicates you're climbing. And the pilot flying will say, gear up. And that's it for that moment. That occurs at a couple of hundred feet. So why at 600 feet? The undercarriage is still down means they haven't selected the gear. The other thing that's remarkable is that it appears that the flap, which is the high lift devices that enables you to fly slower, they appear not to be down. Now, you can't take off without flap. Even the Falcon I fly at the moment, if I advance my thrust levers beyond 80%, it's going to scream at me and say, no takeoff, flap. The aircraft these days won't allow you to take off without flap. So it obviously got airborne with flap, but my own suspicion is that when the pilot flying called for gear up, the other pilot inadvertently grabbed the flap lever and pushed it through to zero. Now, if you're climbing out at 165 knots, which apparently was the speed, flight radar shows the speed at which it's crashed, you cannot fly without the high lift devices. As a matter of fact, the speed at which you can fly with a clean wing with no high lift devices would actually be in the order of 240 knots. So you have to, starting at 1,000 feet, you select the first stage of flap up, the second stage, and so on until you have what's known as a clean wing by about 240 knots. But they're doing about 165, 170 knots with no flap, which means they're in a deep stall. So it appears that most likely the other pilot, and I have to say there's a lot of very junior, inexperienced pilots because of the expansion in the airline industry worldwide these days, he may have just inadvertently selected the flap to zero. And once you've done that, immediately you're in a deep stall, and at 600 feet, you cannot recover. There's just not enough height, even though the engines are at full power. The only other thing could well be that both engines reduce to idle but the 787 has never, ever had a crash before. The safest airplane in the world up to now. So as well, when you have got the gear up, the pilot flying has his hands on the thrust levers anyway, and if they should inadvertently retract by themselves, right, which never has happened before, he could override and push it forward. So, it's a very, very tragic
It is. Captain Byron Bailey, we've got to get moving, but we really appreciate your expertise on the program this morning. It certainly is a tragedy.